Good afternoon. Welcome to the August 24th, 2022 meeting of the Thurston Regional Housing Council. I'm Carolyn Cox, the City of Lacey representative to the council. And we have here with us Lacey City Manager Scott Spence, Lacey Director of Community and Economic Development, Rick Walk. Who am I missing? John? And is Kelly with us too?
She is not today.
She is not, okay. And John. So let's move on to Thurston County.
Thank you. Carolina Mejia, Thurston County Commissioner, and I see County Manager Ramiro Chavez. I see Tom Webster, Keely Marino, and Jacinda Stalgis. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Water.
Hi, Michael Althauser, Tumwater City Council. I'm joined by our City Administrator, John Doan, as well as Brad Medrud from our Planning Department. And I believe I'll also be joined by my alternate Councilmember, Joan Cathy. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. And I need to announce that we will not have a voting representative from City of Olympia here today, but we do have here Rich Hoy, who is acting Assistant City Manager now. Rich, you want to introduce Darian?
Yes, good afternoon, thank you. And also here is Darian Lightfoot, our Housing Programs Manager. Great,
all righty. Well, has everyone had a chance to take a look at the agenda? Can I have a motion to approve it, please?
Mrs. Michael, so moved.
All right.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Michael, seconded by Carolina to approve the agenda. Any comment? No? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Do we have any public comment?
Oh, we have no one that has signed up for public comment today.
Okay. Are there any callers on the line who wish to address the Housing Council? Not hearing any or seeing any on the attendees list. So, all righty. So can I have a motion to approve the August 10th meeting minutes?
Mrs. Michael, so moved.
I'll second.
This is getting to be a pattern, huh? All righty. Any comment on the minutes? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So this brings us to the right-of-way update. We have 4 presenters here. Keely, do you want to lead off or?
Sure. So planning and response continues, and I'll just talk really quickly about the meetings that we have on a twice-a-week basis, just to keep you up to speed on where things are at. So we do have fully executed contracts with Olympia Mutual Aid Partners for outreach, as well as Safe Place for hoteling for those actively fleeing domestic violence that are living in the right-of-ways. In earnest, some case consultation meetings are happening between Interfaith Works, Safe Place, and OLIMAP and other partners to ensure that there's excellent collaboration around placement and strategies around difficult people who we're having difficulty finding places that work for them. So that continues, that's moving forward. And then on a twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we continue to meet with our state partners. So Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, and Washington State Patrol, and as well as our jurisdictional partners and provider stakeholders to strategize around each individual encampment as we move forward. All efforts have been focused on Pacific, the interchanges around Pacific and along Martin Way and Pacific also. There are a few remaining individuals on those right-of-ways Those particular individuals are really difficult to find appropriate housing for. So they were going to pause on removing everyone from the right-of-ways at those interchanges and move on to downtown Olympia. So around Henderson, all the interchanges around Henderson, et cetera, downtown. That means that outreach will begin and a by name list will be created and people will be prepped, et cetera. So that's where we are with individual camps and the providers that are offering services contracted because of right-of-way initiative. And I will turn it over to my colleagues for further updates.
Okay, who's next?
I can go. I don't have much more to add than Keely. The homeless response outreach team are going to sites like Pacific almost daily to continue offering beds and partnering with OLIMAP to do outreach on the sites and to connect people to available beds. At Unity Commons, we're still moving forward on the development of Franz Anderson. We've worked closely with Commerce to best evaluate the federal procurement standards so we can move the project forward and hopefully get the tiny home village up by the end of the calendar year or shortly after. So nothing more to add. Keely covered most of it, and that's where Olympia's at.
If I could, I just wanted to thank Darian and our homeless response outreach staff for the work that they're doing here. They're really doing a good job. It's hard work. So just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge them.
Thanks, Rich. Any questions so far of Keely and Darian? Okay, so Jacinda, do you have a contribution here?
Ellen, I think maybe the last meeting I had mentioned, I think I'd mentioned it before, but if I have not, I will mention only that Lehigh is interested in working with the hotel ownership to close earlier than that originally proposed January date. So I think that's the only thing on the hotel front from me.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you said it, I missed it. So that's good to know. And let's see, is Rick still with us? Yes, he is. Rick, you're on here.
Really, brief and just adding on with the hotel acquisition. We will be looking at a public outreach program where we put that on pause until we get a little bit more information on how the hotel acquisition process will work and how we can set up the operation. So we'll be doing robust outreach at some point, but right now those efforts are on pause until we have more information.
And then I wanted to kind of jump in and so kind of that's the update. The main conversation we wanted to have at the RHC tonight is around the hotel acquisition and to let everyone know that we have been notified by the state that the Department of Commerce intends to contract directly with Lehigh for the acquisition and rehab of the hotel. So we have kind of requested want to kind of let you know that was not the intent of the proposal that we submitted as a regional response. We've conveyed our kind of desire to have Commerce contract directly with the county with that. So in conversations with Ramiro, I know he has updated our Board of County Commissioners on this. We have requested a meeting with the Department of Commerce, the senior leadership at Commerce, to better understand kind of the decision-making of why they are not contracting through the county or a jurisdiction and going straight to Lehigh. There are concerns about our ability to then kind of leverage kind of how this property is operated. So I wanted to kind of raise that with this group and then have discussion on, kind of let you know that we are working to set up that meeting with Ramiro and Scott to have that. And so I don't know, Ramiro, if you want to kind of continue that conversation, if we have a specific request. Anyway, want to see if there's additional guidance from the Regional Housing Council as we move forward.
Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon. Tom outlined in general terms the concerns that we have. I believe the intent, and that's how the region submitted the application to Commerce. And it seems to me they have changed the way, at least our understanding was, in addition to loosen leverage on the operational aspects as to how they're going to be planning to operate this facility. I think my major concern is in the long term, whether the region, Thurston County, can access capacity into this facility. Because then at some point we'll lose the opportunity to coordinate not just the individuals located in the states right away, but also the intent always has been, at least from our understanding, is that we'll be able to access that capacity in that particular hotel, not just for the individuals within the states right away, but within the county region. So those are the high level concerns. As Tom stated, hopefully we can arrange a meeting with the state and try to understand a little bit better what the decision-making process of that change and direction. That will be great. But also, if that meeting is not fruitful, I would like to request the Regional Housing Council to write a letter to the state outlining our concerns, if that is a possibility. Thank you. Scott, like to add anything?
No, I think it's important to have that meeting so we get more clarity. And I think once we have some of those details, we'd be in a better position to communicate if there's any concerns that we may have.
You know, well, I think it'd be premature to discuss it too much until we really have that information. But does anybody have anything they want to weigh in on what Tom and Ramiro and Scott just shared with us?
I guess the only thing that I would say would be that I think it becomes, in terms of our ability to talk to the public about why this is important, I think that it's a more powerful message when there is sort of a structural legal partnership between the cities and the county and the state. Like, I think it shows unity, that we're all on the same page, that we think this is an important step we need to take for the benefit of the community. So like, I don't know how that fits in with the meeting you'll be having with either the governor's office or Commerce or whoever it is, but just to the extent that, you know, it's probably not unrealistic that we'll hear some concerns from folks in the community, and to the extent that, you know, we can all say, well, you know what, we're partnering with the state on this because we think this is the right thing to do. I mean, that's good for the state and it's good for us when we have those economies of scale in terms of open lines of communication and a good idea for what the long-term plan is. So, you know, that's not a question. I guess that's a comment more than a question, but that's sort of where I see it, is like, I see this potential partnership, if it does go through the county, is mutually beneficial, not only for us from the ability to work on it, but also from the state's perspective too, because, you know, we all have a joint interest in this being successful. And I think it has the best chance of being successful when we're equal partners and have kind of that architecture behind the agreement to move forward. So, for what it's worth.
Yeah. Michael, can I ask a question of Michael and the comments he just made?
Please.
Like, so are you suggesting, like, with this meeting that the county and city managers are going to have with Department of Commerce to relay that message, or are you suggesting maybe we write a letter on behalf, like, kind of, you know, this is the sentiments that we bring from the RHC, or are those just kind of general comments? And
I mean, I'm speaking for myself. I'd be open to a letter. I think it makes sense that we sort of sit at a table first and kind of talk about these things to sort of understand, you know, why the state thinks the policy is, like, the policy underlying the decision to change things or to go in this direction. Like, I think it's important to understand that context. But, you know, if folks want to convey that, you know, this body talked about this briefly and that some of the sentiment was that we think there's benefits to partnering, you know, I mean, this is recorded, right? Like, I don't mind if that's conveyed, right? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important that we defer on letter to the team that's going to be talking with Commerce and, you know, how we can support that. Mm-hmm. But I do think, kind of following up with what Michael said in terms of dealing with our constituencies when there are, you know, there's bound to be issues that come up once this thing is up and running, and it would make it much more difficult to be able to have to explain to the public, well, yeah, you know, it's here, but we're not running it, and there's not much we can do about it. And I think it would really put us in a pretty awkward position that way. Never mind just wanting more local control. Carolina?
Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, I guess I'm gonna say, you know, I was one of the main ones that was frustrated when I first heard about this, because I felt staff worked so hard, the technical team worked so hard on this proposal, and they did such an amazing job. And, you know, I felt like all of a sudden something shifted. But, you know, in conversations with the commission, you know, we discussed it, and I definitely think it's a good idea that we sit down with Department of Commerce and see where they're coming from and why they're angling it this way, and seeing it with communication if maybe they kind of see where we're coming from and our concerns and our community's concerns, and maybe their perspective might shift from there. So I think it's definitely a good idea to approach and have that open conversation with them. I think, you know, of course, I have all the trust in the county manager and the city managers that they're going to relay our sentiments to Department of Commerce. You know, the fact that this was a regional proposal, it's not coming from, you know, not a single jurisdiction, but it's something that's regional, and very proud of the work that staff was able to do in such a short turnaround in an effort to put this proposal together at their request. And so we're just wanting to be good partners and wanting them to be good partners as well. So thank you.
Thanks. Well said. Anybody have anything else they want to add to this topic? Staff? Ready? Okay. Well, if we're ready to move on.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Sorry, Romero.
No, yes, I didn't raise my hand. Sorry, my apologies. Okay. Just a comment, but also we also need to start looking. This is an asset to the region, and we also have to be looking from that perspective as well. I think there's an opportunity to work with the state, but also I think we have been looking for this asset to be part of Thurston County, and perhaps it's going to materialize. So we have to be looking from that perspective as well. That is a good asset to address the region needs.
Thank you. Carolina, was that a hand up?
Yes, yes, just to add on to what the county manager said, because I think he's absolutely right. It definitely is an asset to our communities. You know, and it's also, we have to think of the long-term impact as well that this, you know, new proposal will have on, you know, all of the jurisdictions. So just taking it from that perspective as well. So thank you, County Manager, for that.
Okay. Any last thoughts? Okay, hearing none, why don't we move on to the initial proposal for the governance structure, and we have Tom leading that one.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, and so just want to kind of, so hopefully everyone can see the slides, and so I want to kind of start this out by just providing a little context to say that the technical team has been working on this for the past, really since shortly after the retreat in May. We have been engaged multiple times, kind of both as the technical team, but we've also engaged with the HATS Homeless Crisis Response Work Group. And we also we've met a couple times with the county and city managers and city administrator, including this past Monday, where we had a really good conversation that also included representatives from the HATS. So a lot of conversations have gone into this. I will say this is also what we're proposing is an interim governance structure. And so the idea is something that can be stood up relatively quickly, immediately, to move forward as we work on the long-term kind of role for the RHC and governance structure, what that long-term future looks like, because we know that's going to take some more time. So this is really an interim proposal over the next kind of couple of years or whatever that looks like. So with that, kind of our goal was to create a short-term governance structure from the RHC as all that long-term governance structure of a more independent agency is under consideration. So some of the guiding principles that kind of structured the work or informed where we were trying to go is, one, we wanted to build on the trust that occurred from the retreat between the RHC and HAT members. Really wanted to find a structure that supported meaningful engagement with the Housing Action Team, as well as other subject matter experts kind of within the RHC process. The Lived Experience Steering Committee that's being developed by our consultants, we wanted to make sure that we incorporated that Lived Experience Steering Committee into the RHC. Under the county's ordinance for the local home fund, as well as the interlocal agreement between the city of Olympia and the county that is nearly finalized and signed, but we need to incorporate the Home Fund Advisory Board into this process, provide greater clarity and transparency to funding decisions, address some staff support needs, and then really kind of set this up to inform amendments to the Regional Housing Council interlocal agreement. So this high-level framework is what we've come up with. I will acknowledge that I think we have broad consensus on this, but probably not universal agreement on every element of this proposal that we're bringing forth. So I'll point out where some of the areas of further discussion are. So starting off in the upper left is the Regional Housing Council. So having the elected officials as voting members and jurisdiction staff, really the bolded items are new, of having a Housing Action Team representative as a non-voting member of the Regional Housing Council. And I will acknowledge this is one area where I think there's probably not universal agreement on that. Specifically, I know Scott has raised some concerns with that. So had robust discussions, whether they should be a voting member, a non-voting member, or even whether it's appropriate to have someone as a formal member from the HAT at the RHC. So I think that is something we're going to be looking for additional guidance from this body on. A more formal structure for an RHC executive / admin. This is called for in the county's home fund ordinance. And so putting a little more formality behind this, although this is kind of already exists with the chair and vice chair forming the executive committee to set the agendas, along with the RHC manager, and then these advisory boards, staff leads, and a communication lead. So very similar structure to what we have now, but perhaps a little more formal, a little more robust. On the far right side is what we're proposing for kind of an RHC operational staff, which is really kind of on the interim will be the Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention here at the county. So these list the basic positions we have, with a bolded position saying that we're looking to add an affordable housing manager, kind of the equivalent of what the role Keeley plays now as our homeless response manager. And then also a communication specialist who can also serve as a communication lead for the Regional Housing Council. So looking to add those positions. We have the tech team as it currently exists, would really play this role kind of between these advisory boards and the Regional Housing Council. So I'll kind of skip over that briefly, and I'll come back to it. So the bottom piece here is really looking to create 2 advisory boards. One is the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, or the Home Fund Advisory Board, as it's currently called in Olympia. This would be led by the Thurston County Affordable Housing Manager, as well as the Olympia Home Fund Manager as staff leads, and comprise, similar to the way the Olympia Home Fund is currently managed. We use that as the basis, the model, to expand that. So it's now a countywide, and whether other kind of subject matter experts would be added to that. So really the purpose of this board would be that the funds that this board would oversee that we're proposing is, in addition to the local countywide and Olympia Home Fund dollars, would be the federal home program dollars, as well as the 1406 dollars and the 2060 dollars. So all of those capital dollars would be kind of under the purview of this board. And they would be responsible for making recommendations around priorities, as well as reviewing applications and making funding recommendations for the use of those funds, as well as the idea of policy coming from these boards as well. Kind of a parallel board to be created that would be new would be this Homeless Services Advisory Board, staffed by the Homeless Response Manager, Keeley, with a similar makeup of HAT members and other subject matter experts. This could be, folks from behavioral health, other advocates, similar to kind of folks on the Homeless Crisis Response Work Group. Similarly, they would make recommendations around funding priorities, reviewing applications, and also kind of policy. We have the Lived Experience Steering Committee that is being created as we speak with a consultant. So we've kind of got that as in a dotted oval, recognizing that it will be important to have interaction between these advisory boards and the steering committee, especially as priorities are developed and recommended up, that their input will be particularly important. The details of that still need to be worked out as that group gets developed. So that's why we don't have really any arrows, but really kind of those 3 boxes, groups, kind of consolidated kind of around that bigger box, that those will need to kind of coordinate with each other. So coming back up to the tech team, the idea, we put the dotted kind of line around the tech team. The tech team is not intended to be a stopping point for kind of recommendations coming from these boards, but really a compliance check as much to make sure that what is being recommended, there's kind of coordination between the boards, that maybe kind of a little polishing, maybe perhaps some questions that go back, but the tech team would not reject or approve any recommendations coming from these advisory boards. They would kind of really just package them up for the Regional Housing Council. So Michael, I see your hands up, but let me just kind of walk through a couple things and we'll kind of come back. So this is kind of a big picture operational structure. What I've included is a funding cycle chart to kind of illustrate how the funding process would work. So kind of as we talked about, the Lived Experience Steering Committee, the LESC, as well as the advisory boards, would make priority recommendations and criteria. That would go through the tech team to ensure compliance. And then that would come up to the RHC to set the priorities in the process. The green are really kind of administrative steps that our office would take. We would then develop that RFP. The Board of County Commissioners takes formal action to approve that RFP. And then that RFP is issued, applications are submitted. The advisory boards would score applications and make recommendations. That would again go through the tech team to ensure compliance, kind of coordination, consistency, and then come up to the RHC for funding recommendations before they go to the BOCC for final approval, and then we would issue contracts. And then we've noted that if in the unlikely but not impossible scenario where the Board of County Commissioners would send something back to the RHC, that then it would be really up to the RHC to how to address that Board of County Commissioners concern and whether it needed to go back to the advisory board for further consideration or not. It may not necessarily need that. So that is kind of a high level overview of the funding cycle that's proposed. And then around policy, we talked a lot about whether these boards would have a role in crafting policy or making recommendations around policy. And so to the extent that there is kind of policy under the Regional Housing Council, that could come from an advisory board, the tech team, the lived experience. The RHC could kind of direct a tech team or one of these boards to look at a policy issue. That would then be either vetted by the lived experience committee, or if the lived experience kind of steering committee kind of created that policy, it would be vetted through an advisory board, go through the tech team just for a compliance check again before coming up to the full RHC for consideration. So wanted to kind of show both the funding path and then what the thinking is around kind of a policy kind of process. I will kind of acknowledge, in addition to the housing action team kind of representation at the RHC, we also had good discussion about whether, you know, these advisory boards should just be making recommendations around priorities, and then scoring and funding of applications, recommendations around funding applications should really kind of remain at the tech team. So we've had those discussions, and I think that was robust. I think the majority of the group agreed that the advisory boards, it was appropriate, but I don't know if we necessarily have unanimous agreement on that, but that's kind of was the majority opinion on that, and feeling that those people on those boards are able to recuse themselves if they're on an agency that submitted an application. There'd have to be clear process in place for conflict of interest or recusal. So that is a pretty high level kind of overview. And then just the rest of the charts, I think I've talked through kind of roles and responsibilities for the different kind of groups. So I think nothing in there is new, kind of the funds that those advisory boards would set up. So let me stop there and take questions. So yes, Michael.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Michael. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to see people, so just speak up.
Okay, thanks. I have two questions. So the first one is pertaining to this slide. For the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and the Homeless Service Advisory Board, was there discussion of whether any RHC voting members, particularly and if any of the electeds will serve on either of those? Like we currently have, I think it's you, Joan, and yourself as well, Carolyn, that sort of serve on the current bodies that make those recommendations. But so would that no longer have that kind of institutional presence there?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you for that question. So I would say to back up, so a next step we would have, if we have kind of agreement from this board to move forward, is really to develop the details of how these advisory boards will work and who would sit on them. I think our current thinking would be not to have elected officials on these advisory boards, but that's, I think, open for discussion and open for direction from this group. So I would say no final decisions on that have been made. However, I think the initial thinking, the way the Olympia Home Fund Board is, I do not believe there's elected officials on there, the Olympia's Home Fund Board. So we were modeling it after the Olympia Home Fund process, which does not have elected officials. But I think that's, I think we're open to that discussion.
Okay. One of the reasons why I think that's been helpful for our current process is just because there's been a couple times where we've had questions about the recommendations, and you know, Joan or you, Carolyn, have been able to speak to those. So if there is like maybe one of the non-voting folks or some of the other representatives on RHC could then also be on that board. Like if there's a little bit of crossover, I think that's helpful to tell the story of the context for how the decisions were made. Though I guess now I think about it more, you know, staff will be present at both of those probably, like the tech team will probably be represented at those and could field questions for the RHC general body. But my second question is about, I think it's the next slide. If you could, maybe it's one more slide after this. There's fewer bubbles. Yes, that one. So for the policy development here, I guess my question is sort of like how you get to that, what comes before that first part of it? Like, is it the RHC mission and vision and our goals that then kind of set the table for policy development to begin? Or does that envision to happen organically with the advisory board and the tech team and independently the lived experience subcommittee? Or like, how does that actually facilitate itself so that, you know, you actually have the direction for the development of the policy and then the work actually happens? Does that question make sense?
Makes sense. And I would say we haven't had a lot of discussion about that yet. I think this really kind of came out of our Monday meeting a little bit. So I think there's more discussion for that. I think there's multiple ways you get to that. I think it could come from kind of the RHC, you know, if there's discussions at the RHC level, you know, just to throw out, you know, renter protections. Hey, you know, you could send that back to the tech team or to an advisory board. Could you kind of look at this more? Or it may happen more organically from those boards who are seeing an obstacle as they're kind of working through their process. Or it could be something that honestly comes from the housing action team. The HAT could, you know, be working on something, and before it came to the RHC, they said, hey, we have something we'd like to share. Let's send it through an advisory board for review before it kind of comes to the RHC. So I think there's multiple paths before kind of getting to one of these bubbles. So I think you're right. I don't know if it's halfway through that process, but there's probably is some work from various sources that would feed into kind of one of these groups, and then taking that policy, you know, reviewing it, developing it, and then kind of vetting it up to the RHC. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there's multiple ways to kind of start that policy conversation.
Yeah, I think it does. I think that it probably doesn't have room in this chart or space in this chart, but I think that, you know, one thing that would probably make that successful is you know, if we do an annual retreat where we set goals for the upcoming 12 months, and then that can kind of give staff adequate direction to try to work with, you know, these entities to then begin policy development. Like, it seems like that this process would also be complemented by some corresponding strategic planning for us to sort of make sure that everyone knows that what direction we're rowing in, so that all the policies we work on are complementary with one another. Those are my only questions. Thanks for letting me hug the mic.
I can stop sharing my screen if people prefer. Would people like to have me keep this up on the screen? So I think you're muted, Carolyn.
Thank you. I'd like to keep it up. I think it's important to keep this in front of us, but I just wanted everybody to know I'm kind of flying blind in terms of being able to recognize you. Tom, I do have one question around the funding cycle. Seems like, you know, by early fall, we are getting those things in place. And how do you see this coming together under, I guess, in terms of timing and adopting a new governance? Is this going to work out, or we're going to be?
Yeah, and let me see if I actually have. I had a document that so in terms of timing, in next steps, we are on a pretty tight time frame in order to get this up and running for our next funding cycle. So what we'd be looking for is kind of general direction to move forward, to kind of really put the kind of flesh out the structure of these advisory boards kind of in September, and would look to come back in early October to seek your approval for the details for the structure and kind of roles, responsibilities, kind of operating policies and procedures for these boards. So that we could go out and solicit membership and applications, nominations to serve on these boards during October, with the hope of bringing you recommendations or those applications, nominations in early November, with the goal of having these boards ready to kind of kind of have a first meeting by the end of November, so that they could begin. Really, the first step is then for them to develop those priority recommendations that would need to come to the RHC by January for your review, so we can develop an RFP by February. So that means that these boards would need to be really in place kind of by November, do some really fast work to develop those initial priorities. So that's the time frame that we're generally shooting for. And so those would be kind of the next steps. I think in your packet also was kind of laid out some of those next steps while we look at kind of for the long-term governance structure. The thought would be to kind of create an RFP to help find a consultant to help us kind of look at that long-term structure with the goal of, issuing an RFP kind of in early 2023 to identify that. But for these next couple months, really, fleshing out the details of these advisory boards, then starting to work on the amendments to the interlocal agreement. Well, we're certainly going to need to incorporate the home funds into the interlocal agreement, other structures, and we know that will take some time as well.
And I just wanted to add that the current home fund in Olympia, we have our charter and we have the makeup of our roster. We have a pretty good foundation of what the board looks like, and me and the county have been meeting already to talk about potential formation of the board and how we can keep that moving. So November is quick, but I think if we keep this moving at the RHC level, then we would be able to meet that timeline.
Darian, this is Rich. Could you maybe just describe briefly the current makeup of the Home Fund Advisory Board?
Yes, currently there are 9 voting members and 2 ex officio members. And those 9 voting, the ex officio is one from the police department and one from the fire department. And the 9 voting members make up of local providers, developers, bankers, behavioral health specialists, and members at large, 9 members throughout the community that serve on the board. They serve between 2 and 3 year terms, and those overlap. So we don't have people exiting their terms all at the same time, but they are subject matter experts on development, banking, and service provision throughout the community.
Thank you, Darian. And Chair Cox just said before, I just wanted to mention, of course, we're sorry that our RHC members could not be here today, but I was asked to relay that our city manager was able to brief Councilmember Madrone, and she's very supportive of the proposed direction here on the governance structure. Councilmember Cooper's out of town, so we haven't been able to brief him yet. So we'll catch up with him when he gets back to town, but wanted to relay that.
Alrighty, thanks, Rich. So first blush impressions, Michael and Carolina.
I don't have any questions. I guess I just have comments just to say thank you to staff for working on this. Once it's explained and kind of laid out, it does make sense as an intermediate solution and kind of the things that we talked about at the retreat. So.
Yeah, I agree with everything Carolina had to say. I think I sort of had some goals for what this would look like, or I guess goals is the wrong term, but sort of like twin aims for things that I thought would make for sort of a successful proposed structure, one of which was, subject matter expertise and, centering that. Particularly, I think it's important that it's centered as at the beginning of the process, like it is here with the Affordable Housing Board and the Homeless Services Board. Like, I think it's really good that we do that, because when a lot of these recommendations come before us, once they're cooked and developed and discussed, it's much more difficult to deviate away from those and to make changes at the end. So I think that forming those with lived experience at the table, with subject matter experts at the table at the forefront is smart. And then also having some dual representation from those folks on the RHC at the end, I think is also a positive. And then having you know, the rest of the structure in terms of what the RHC looks like, and expanding that and having a little bit more, having some more voice at the table when we have these discussions, I think is really positive too. So I think this is a good, and really interested to see sort of what the next step would look like in terms of formulating this into a proposal. But if we're sort of just taking a temperature, I'd say that the temperature is just about right from my perspective.
Okay, and I concur with what's been said so far, and really want to thank the staff. I know this has been a Herculean task to try to get it this far, and it's a real testament to our jurisdictional staffs that they're working so well together and making these things come together. So thank you. Again, we're not going to take any sort of a formal vote on this, but I think you've heard consensus that we're heading in the right direction, and you'll have something to bring back to us in September.
Yep.
Did I get that
I don't
right?
want to, yeah, we will kind of at our next meeting. And so I don't want to put, I guess I will put kind of Scott's on the spot, especially, you know, if you wanted to weigh in. I know, or Ramiro, or any of the you know, or John, or others, because I know we had a good discussion on Monday, and there wasn't necessarily a universal agreement on everything. So I wanted to kind of, you know, just if anyone has anything else to say from the tech team or the kind of the city county leadership on this, please weigh in.
So maybe I'll just
trying to represent the group, but no, there's different opinions.
Thanks, Tom. So just the reference to the Regional Housing Council, I guess I was an advocate to make that an independent body made solely of elected officials, just to keep the independence and that separation. We had a lot of good discussion about having subject matter experts and representatives from HAT, and that's important to get their perspective on not just policy, but maybe also applications. We just want to make sure that there is good separation if there ever is a conflict of interest. And if it gets to the point of the Regional Housing Council, all the input has been made by the subject matter experts, or for HAT, there wouldn't be a need to have, at least in my opinion, more representation on the Regional Housing Council. Otherwise, we should just collapse the entire structure. But it's sort of kind of keeping the independence of elected officials, recognizing their special role in this process, but also allowing subject matter experts inform not just policy, but projects at the Affordable Housing Advisory Board level, as well as the Homeless Advisory Board level. So that was kind of the lot of the debate. And then you'd have your tech team potentially just having to make sure that we're spending the money in the right categories, making sure it's fully informed, and maybe not having jurisdictional staff involved, because it's a compliance check at that point. But that hopefully that informs some of the policy debate as we have a more robust discussion at the next time that Regional Housing Council discusses this issue.
Scott, could you elaborate a little bit more? I think the proposal is that none of these additions would be voting members, but can you explain to me a little bit more about your concern?
So again, this is I just want to respect the table, I guess, would be the way I'd look at this. I mean, I feel a little bit, even sometimes when staff is at the table and we're providing advice and guidance to council, I guess at some point when you're handed a decision, it's up to elected officials to debate that out and basically make that decision. I recognize they're not voting members, but at some point, at what point do you sort of allow the influence to carry up all the way to, I guess, the decision-making table? Gotcha. So is that necessary?
Thank you for clarifying that. John Doan, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I think actually, I think Councilmember Altazer did a great job of we had a conversation yesterday about this. I think he did a great job summarizing that. So I don't really have anything to add.
Okay. Brad, do you?
No, the same comments that John made applies here. I think we covered the issues that we talked about yesterday as well.
All right. Ramiro?
Thank you. I really don't have anything to add on what has been discussed. Thank you, though.
Sure. And Rich, I don't know if you've been party to these or not, but I sure don't want to leave you out.
Thank you, Chair Cox. I participated. I'm new to this. I'm still learning, but I participated in the Monday meeting. Jay Burney as well. We're very supportive of the proposed governance structure. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, Tom.
You can't see people. Anyway, this is Joan. I just wanted to say that the meeting that John and Brad just referred to with Michael, I was part of that, and I just want to put my voice in and say I'm optimistic about this. I think there's still work to be done, and it's going to test us to work together and trust each other and move forward. But I'm very cautiously and very optimistic. So I was part of that discussion yesterday, and it was very good. And Michael did represent what was said articulately, like he always does. So thanks.
Thank you, Joan. Anybody else?
I guess I'd be curious to hear more kind of feedback on Michael's comment on whether it would be appropriate for kind of elected officials to whether it be have an ex officio role on these advisory boards, or what is your kind of initial thoughts on the role of kind of RHC members at the advisory board level? I'd like to hear more discussion on the kind of pros and cons of that, just to inform us as we move forward, if I can ask that.
I can take the first swing at this. I usually attend the Housing Action Team meetings, and I like, being there and hearing what's being said and being part of the conversation, but it is also kind of uncomfortable as well, because, I'm asked to give the jurisdictional update, that sort of thing. And I don't know, it feels a little awkward to me. I don't see myself as really much of, I have one vote amongst the whole Housing Action Team, so it's not like a weighted influence at all, but it is a little awkward. So I think it's something we ought to have some care to. And I also wouldn't want to be a dampening influence on these groups either. Anybody have other thoughts on it?
I would actually defer to Joan, not to put you on the spot here, Joan, but I'm sort of interested in your perspective, since you've been not only serving in this role, but have a history with working with some of the other decision-making groups that existed prior to our current structure.
Yes, you did put me on the spot. I don't have my notes here with me, just have years of remembering things. One of the things in this discussion so far that I appreciated was what Scott Spence said about the RHC being elected officials, and that's where we are, where we have to be and make the decisions. I think, and like Carolyn says, it is weighted when there is an elected person at a meeting that is advisory or whatever, because you are the person also having the final say as this moves forward. So I think that's part of what Carolyn's trying to say. That puts you in a little bit of a bind. Yeah, and over the years, I've noticed in that kind of a thing, let's say that, as an elected person, I'm at the table while we're talking about the funding or the recommendations from the applications or something like that. At times has raised some suspicion that that one jurisdiction or one project or something was weighted more because a person was was an elected person. So I think we're trying to do the best we can with that. But if we keep trying to, if that's the way we want to run this, the way we've got it here now, which I think is a good plan, we can't keep trying to include everyone at each level, because it does make a difference. It's whether you have a voice, whether you have a vote or not. If you are at the table, you have a voice, and therefore you have influence. So I just think we need to be careful how we put some of these advisory councils and the RHC is together. And it's not going to please everyone, and it's not going to make everyone feel included, but we have to have a sure way of doing this. So like I say, I think that those of you who have worked on this have done an excellent job in bringing this together. And I think there's a lot of positive things here, ways to work out. But I would say, you know, if it's elected officials that are going to make the final decision that goes to the Board of Commissioners, we need to keep it that way, and then decide how we're going to incorporate people at the other levels of decision making. So those are my thoughts today.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
If I may,
sure.
Chair Cox. So I just wanted to bring forward some of the comments that were made at the meeting on Monday from the HAT members that were in attendance. And one of the points that was brought up is that there are oftentimes there are providers in the audience. So they're on the Zoom, and they are called on to give feedback when it is appropriate or when it is called upon for the Regional Housing Council to have that perspective. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that we do rely on them to give us information on things that we don't understand. And as they are, I am a non-voting member and I contribute, they would be non-voting members, and they also would contribute a very specific subject matter perspective in a timely manner, meaning in the middle of the conversation when there's some confusion about how something might operate or how a program might operate. So I just wanted to make sure to bring that voice forward, because I thought that was a really salient point.
Thanks, Keely. Joan, did you have your hand up?
Thanks, Keely, for that reminder that is how things have worked along the way. And I remember we reached a point where we had to make sure that we were, getting input that we needed to make our decisions, and we weren't feeling or seeing this as lobbying. And I think that that's where, when you're in the room or in a meeting or whatever, you have an opportunity to share your expertise and so on and so on. But I just want us to be careful that we don't get, back into some of the concerns that somebody's getting more opportunity to lobby for their cause, because you're exactly right. It is very valuable to have the people who are doing the work and the people who have been at this a long time, for them to be available to answer questions. I totally agree with that. We just have to keep a fine, fair line in those situations. That's what I was meaning to say.
Okay, Rick has his hands up.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I just want to offer this too, following up on Keely's comments and some of the conversation that came out of the Monday's meeting and some meetings after that too, because really the goal is try to make sure that there's not only voices in this process and informing the decision makers once they make those final decisions, but also building relationships. And so there's some conversations been around too. Another way of looking at that is we're now having the RHC meeting twice a month. We've always talked about having that one meeting potentially being a work session, You have more of a roundtable conversation in those meetings with HAD or service providers, subject matter experts, or you can also look at having potentially one meeting or more in a year of the RHC being a joint meeting with HAD to talk about issues and talk about those things and get that information and have that dialogue too. So there's a more of a roundtable conversation versus specific appointees. You have the whole group conversation as well. So that could be something else that the RHC could consider.
Okay. This is good. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you. I think it's a good conversation. I guess one little consensus item that might be good to have is, can we all agree that no matter where we land with having those groups be part of the membership, that only electeds will have voting rights? Do we concur on that, Michael and Carolina?
I think that was a pretty important component of sort of what brought us all together in the first place.
Yep.
The ad hoc committee was that when it does come to scrutiny of expenditures of public dollars, that it's important that there be accountability in the form of voters having the ability to say, we didn't like how you did something. So if dollars are spent in a way that voters disagree with, then that's on us. That's, part of being an elected official in that sense. So I think that is a pretty important component. I would also add, just in terms of looking at other models, I don't serve on JASCOM anymore, the Joint Animal Services, but I used to. And they sort of have it the same way, where it's the jurisdictions that pay the assessments, and it's the jurisdictions that have the votes on forming the budget and substantive policy matters in that sense. Mm-hmm. And there's other like nonprofit providers that sit on the board that don't vote because they don't contribute that assessment to pay for Joint Animal Services to be run. So that there is kind of some models that are out there. That's obviously a much smaller organization than what's being contemplated here in terms of size and membership and other matters. But that is a model that exists in our community that's been successful so far.
Thank you. Carolina?
Nothing much to add. I think Michael said it very well. So I don't have any additional comments at this time.
Okay. I think we can say that we want to have that bright line on votes, voting privileges. If that's at all helpful, Tom. Okay. Good. Any other thoughts on governance before we move on to tech team? Okay, then let's move on to tech team, Keely and Tom.
All right, I'll start. The first on the agenda is just the Anchor Community Initiative and the Built for Xero initiative, and there's not much new to report. We're starting up our new cohort. I'm meeting with our cohort mentor for Built for Xero next week. So we'll have, it's still ongoing, but we just started taking we had a bit of a pause, both by design and also by whatever crises was coming our way. So more to report on that soon. And then in terms of the Housing and Essential Needs Program, we have successfully connected with contracted and connected with Live Stories for payment. We've been meeting with them over the last week to ensure that that process is as smooth as possible. So at this point, it's kind of a three-pronged effort. We've got Partners in Prevention Education handling most of the case management, our team kind of providing that transition between CAC to us and Pipe, to us and Pipe and Live Stories. So they are sending out checks. I believe they were printed and sent out today or tomorrow morning for September rent. We have all confidence that the process with them in terms of rents getting out on time is going to be very smooth. Our fiscal services department has been so supportive, getting us through, just tumbling through the HEN program, which is quite a hefty lift, as I've mentioned, I'm sure, several times in this meeting. Partners in Prevention Education are being able to take some intakes now, brand new clients, into the HEN program. Up until this point, there's been a lot of just cleaning up a lot of confusion for current HEN clients. So we've been able to suss out issues that just were points of confusion, or just made contact with landlords that have been very frustrated or just not quite sure what's going on. Our office sent out a letter last week to prepare landlords to expect their rent check to come from Live Stories, not Thurston County. The landlords have, in a matter of 3 months, had their final check from CAC and then Thurston County and now Live Stories. So we're trying to make that as clear as possible to them, what they can expect. We do have the RFP for the new permanent HEN provider out right now, as well as single adult and chronic homeless rapid rehousing contract, as well as the new permanent rent assistance program. That RFP is out. It is closing on the 31st next week, and we are excited, very, very excited to move forward on making a decision for the new permanent HEN provider. Our office, of course, will be holding every hand of every agency that's been working through the HEN transition to ensure that that fourth transition will be as smooth as possible. So just really grateful to our team and Tom's support and the county in general. So, and for the public, just everyone's patience as we attempt to make sure that everyone gets paid and our most vulnerable citizens remain housed or access housing as a new HEN client. And that is, I think, all, really. I'm happy to answer any questions. Or Tom, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that a little bit. So especially on the rent assistance, so to let folks know, our rent assistance program is coming to an end here. The TRAP, ERAP, Treasury COVID funded rent assistance program, Live Stories we've got kind of a couple $2 million that we still are getting out the door. But that is probably over the next couple of weeks here will be the end of that program. And so the nearly $40 million in rent assistance that came to our county for as part of the COVID relief dollars is coming to an end. We've been able to help thousands of families with these dollars. So with this new RFP, it will be a new rent assistance program. It's a much smaller program, a much targeted program, as we think we've said. So we're excited for that program. So we'll get that program up and running here so we can have a long-term rent assistance program in our community, which is we did not have prior to COVID. So that's exciting. That's going to be a new program in our community. It's going to be much more focused on those who are at risk of homelessness and imminent risk of losing their housing and other criteria. So we're excited for that, but wanted to let everyone know that the ERAP, TRAP programs that we've been talking about for the last 18 months or so are going to be winding up here. There'll be a little bit there's still money available for youth and young adults. So CYS will still have some money that will continue for a little bit longer, but for the broad kind of general public. And I know we've closed applications since June, so we'll be working through all those applications. We're hopeful that we'll be able to fund most of the applications that we received through June 15th. There may be a small number that funding may run out before we get to everyone who submitted an application, but we think we're on target to be able to serve the vast majority of those that have submitted an application already. So that's just that update, but I don't have anything else to add.
Councilmember, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. My cat keeps crying, so I keep muting. But I think it's important to keep perspective that, this was COVID money, was one-time money for rent assistance and all. And I'm really excited that we will have a smaller but new rental assistance program to move us through. Are you all anticipating kind of a bumpy transition here? I hate to put it in the negative, but I'm worried about people who will inevitably fall through the cracks on this. And are the local service providers up to speed on this and anticipating anything?
Yeah, so I guess I would say I'm concerned, I don't know if a transition, because it's going to be a new program we're standing up, so there will be kind of a little bit of a gap, but we are hearing there continues to be a great need in our community for rental assistance. And so I think the issue is we will not have sufficient resources to meet the need that is out there for rental assistance, especially as this program is more narrowly focused. That we, as rents have risen, we continue to hear a need for people needing rental assistance. And so I think that's going to be the biggest challenge. And so I don't know if that's a bumpy transition, but it's just the reality that there's going to be insufficient resources to meet the need in our community for rental assistance, especially as rents have been increasing.
I was just about to say that, Tom, that what we're finding with the HEN program is that there are a number of individuals that have been on that program for some time, and we're paying thousands and thousands of dollars in rent increases in arrears, meaning they were paid the rent that was established in their lease, but they received an increase 1, 2, 3 months ago, and we're paying those out, and they're pretty significant increases. And anecdotally in our community, I know personally a number of friends and community members that are renting, and they're just got notices that their rent is going up $400, $500. So I think along with those funds going away and there being a great need, I do anticipate there being a continued and growing need for these services amongst our peers with rent increases. And just to give you a picture of the need in terms of those who are eligible for HEN, and to be eligible for HEN, as a reminder, you have to have a disability that's documented and not have any income basically above $331 or so. I think that was recently raised. Over 900 people are approved for HEN in our county alone. And those are not the ones that have gone through intakes or who are currently being served through our HEN program. Just to give you a picture of the need of severely vulnerable people that need a lot of help.
Yeah, and our budget is we're serving about 250 people is what we have budget.
Okie doke. Anybody else have questions or comments about this? Okay, well, let's move on to good of the order. Who's got one? Olympia?
Yes. I just would like to share that the groundbreaking at Family Support Center happened on August 11th, which was exciting and sweet and celebratory and such a great landmark for our community. And so there was a sweet shovel ceremony, and Trish did a great job of acknowledging all the efforts that were put into this project. Still, the goal is to hopefully lease up by the end of next calendar year, 62 units, over 200 community members served. And so we're on track for that project. And it was very dear and sweet. And a lot of folks on this call had a big investment into this project. And so just a shout out to the Regional Housing Council and to Family Support Center for their years. I mean, like Trish said at the groundbreaking, they started talking about this project in 2016, and it is now 2022. And that's when we're able to start the shovel ceremony. So yeah, just a great asset to the community. Really proud of Family Support Center, proud of my colleagues for all the work they were able to put in, and excited to see it come to fruition.
It's exciting. All right. Anything else from Olympia?
Can I ask some of the Olympia folks a question? I don't know. Could someone talk about the tenant protection stuff that passed? We read about it in the paper. That seems really exciting. Tumwater's going to be looking at some of that stuff in October. but would love to hear if either you could chat a little bit just about that policy that was adopted.
Yes, thank you for the reminder. We had 3 ordinances pass. Had a first reading and second reading. Last week was the second reading. They go into effect, 2 of the ordinance go into effect 30 days after the second reading, and the third ordinance will be extended, and I'll share why. So the first ordinance is about a pet deposit. The pet deposit, the ordinance says that can be no more than 25% of 1 month's rent, and that can be paid over 3 months. And so it's not a per pet, it's a pet deposit flat fee, and it could only be 25% of 1 month's rent, and can be spread out over time so folks are able to pay for that. The next ordinance is that move-in costs can only be 1 month's rent on top of the first month's rent. So no more first, last, and security deposit. If rent is $1,000, then the move-in cost can be an additional $1,000, but nothing more. And that second $1,000 can be for last month's rent or can be for security deposit, but not anything additional on top of that second month's rent. And it's just to really support folks moving into units. If your rent is $2,000, having to come up with $6,000 to get in an apartment is a really large barrier for people. So that was the second ordinance. Both will go into effect 30 days after last week, so mid-September. And the third ordinance is about rent increases. So if a rent increases more than 5%, then tenants are required to receive 120 days of notice. And if the increase is more than 10%, then the requirement is 180 days notice. And so those will both go into effect respectively 120 days and 180 days after the second reading to allow landlords to give those notices to tenants. So 3 great ordinances passed, really looking to support renters in the community. And this, as our council said, that these were the start of our renter protections in Olympia. We had other recommendations come out of our renter protections research study, really looking to develop a landlord registry, which we're excited about, and hopefully that can be a collaborative effort with other jurisdictions in the county. But yeah, had some really good feedback, received some great emails from tenants about how this is going to positively impact them. And we will be holding a webinar in 2 weeks to allow folks to come to learn about the rental protections and how they can stay informed and get more information about updated ordinances. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Excuse me. Thanks, Darian. Anything else from Olympia? Okay. Tom Water.
I don't think we really have anything else. So like I said, we're going to have some deliberations regarding some rental housing stuff in October, but that's it on our end.
All right. Scott or Rick, do you want to bring anything forward from Lacey?
I don't have anything.
Okay. All right. Well, I think Rick kind of said it about outreach to neighbors of the motel and stuff. I think that's been our primary focus. So very good. Well, any last minute things for good of the order?
I think Tom has his hand up. You don't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just one more thing, and this is actually kind of with Darian and Olympia, is I can't remember if he's updated this group, but the county, city of Olympia, and the housing authority are working on an assessment of fair housing. So the city of Olympia is taking the lead on that, but there will be a survey that Krista from the city of Olympia is working on that will be going out. And so we'll be engaging with community members to get their input on kind of barriers to fair housing. And so that informs a basis of a plan that is required to submit to HUD. So we are working on that. The other piece to let folks know on is Olympia and the county, as part of our federal HUD kind of requirements, are moving forward with developing our 5-year consolidated plan So we are contracting with a consultant to help us with that. So this is a process that kind of goes through this winter, and we submit that 5-year plan kind of next summer or July of next year. So those plans are moving forward, but especially wanted to highlight the fair housing kind of survey. And I don't know, Darren, if you know when Krista plans to be sending that out to folks, but appreciate everyone's help in getting the word out around that survey.
Yeah, it should be finalized in the next week or so. Yes, and countywide disbursement of all of your support would be much appreciated. So thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, unless anybody else has anything, I'd like to offer everybody a 40-minute gift of time. Okay. Well, we'll call it adjourned then. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.